of years ago, I was telling actually at the very beginning of my time at Berkeley, I was telling a great friend of mine about my research and my thesis and these amazing fMRI studies that I saw, and lamenting that it would be just so great if I had all the money in the universe and I could get all of these school children from Tibet and get them into fMRI machines, and then do the same with a cohort in the United States, and check the volumetric difference in their amygdalas. And then do it again on some longitudinal study. It'd be really glorious. My friend said a couple weeks later he went to a dinner, Thursday night dinner with this amazing woman, and she was working to develop a portable MRI machine. Like super portable, like portable in an ambulance or out in the field, maybe in Tibet or India, in an ambulance, in medical offices, backpack. Then he mentioned that she was one of the founders for One Laptop per Child. And for those of you who don't know, that's a nonprofit initiative with the goal to transform education in developing countries by creating and distributing low-cost educational devices that have low power and were super sturdy. And I was then instantly a super fan. When I was 10, I saw on the big screen R2-D2 open up, and it was projected, right? Princess Leia, does anybody remember that scene? Nobody in that movie theater was ever thinking about any of the advances that would come from the inspiration that our next guest got at the same scene. So she double majored in art and electrical engineering from Brown University. She received her Master of Science in computational holography. It's about holographs. Thanks for laughing. From the MIT Media Lab, where she was later a professor. She returned to Brown and received her doctorate in optical sciences. Our speaker was an engineering executive at Facebook, Oculus, Google, and Intel. She is named one of our time's greatest thinkers by some of the greatest thinkers of our time. She has founded 4 startups and holds over 250 patents. I know, right? It's like she has superpowers. While her CV lists many of her accomplishments, it will not reveal her lifelong drive to learn, understand, and innovate. And it will not reveal her continual efforts to use those superpowers for good. Please join me in welcoming our speaker, Mary Lou Jepsen.
All right. Hi. Hello. You guys hear me? All right. Thank you so much, Cara, for that wonderful introduction. Well, as you can tell, it's going to be hard to cover everything that Mary Lou has done, but we want to give you guys a taste of her journey and how she got to the portable fMRI machine that Cara was mentioning, what she's working on now. So Mary Lou, can we start a little bit by going back to the beginning, and maybe you can tell us a bit about your formative years. What was it like where you grew up?
I grew up in Connecticut, but not the rich part. I grew up on a farm in Connecticut. It was violent. There were a lot of guns. We had neighbors that shot at us. They never went to jail. My father got stabbed. My father was an auto mechanic. My mom taught high school.
Great. And were there significant in your early life, were there significant moments you think maybe shaped who you are today?
Yeah, I would say it was really violent, and I sort of withdrew into myself. I really loved 2 things: math and art. And so I would basically do those under my bed where it was quiet. And then I grew to like this other thing, swimming, because people could yell at you while you were swimming, but you couldn't hear them. And I liked the quiet. So I became kind of a nerdy science kid as a way of coping, I think, with the chaos around me.
That makes total sense. And yeah, so it seemed like then in your education, you did focus on engineering, math, and art, and kind of this intersection. And then, eventually you were very attracted to holography. And as Cara said, maybe the Star Wars movie was a big, inspiration for you. Later, something I thought was really cool that was in 1991, you put on this big display in Cologne, Germany. And it was only could be seen for 10 minutes a day for 55 days out of the year. And it filled a city block in Cologne. What was that like to work on that project, and where did this love for holograms and holography come from?
I liked optical things. I mean, I had a book, I think it was called Thumbelina, growing up, and it had this lenticular, these stripes, these lens stripes on it, so it looked 3D. Mm-hmm. And as a little kid, 4 or 5, I tried to scratch to get inside of the 3D image, and I wrecked the optics. I made it worse. I couldn't get inside, and I wanted to know how it worked. So when I started college, I majored in engineering, but I took an elective in holography. And hopefully they're better now, but when I was an undergrad at the time the music you heard was coming out, The Clash was very popular, the early 80s. I thought the curriculum would have killed any ounce of creativity I might have had. And I'm not saying I had much, but I started taking, I took this holography class. I'm like, whoa, this is pretty cool. It's the closest thing to a religious experience I ever had. You made all this optical stuff, you bolted it down on this 2-ton table that floated on nitrogen. You had these lenses set up, these beautiful lasers going around. You couldn't even, the whole room was the camera. It had to be completely dark. You couldn't even breathe while you were making the exposure because nothing could move more than a fraction of a wavelength of light relative to something else. And then you'd take this piece of, it was called silver halide film. It's what used to be in cameras, and you had to develop it. And you develop it and dry it with a hairdryer, and it would be this magical 3D scene. And I was hooked. I'm like, whoa, I don't really like the electrical engineering the way it's taught, but I can sort of dive in from this angle, learn all I can about electronics, computer science, electricity and magnetism, chemistry, human visual system, coding, the whole thing. And I sort of focused on it from that lens to get through it in a way that I could love it.
So when did you realize that you could actually study this in your formal education? Did you always kind of know that, or when did it change from being maybe something you're interested in, a hobby, to you realizing that you could actually study this?
Oh, well, my parents, as I mentioned, I grew up not wealthy, and they said they'd help me pay for the best school I could get into as long as I majored in electrical engineering. Today that might be computer science, and they were quite serious. I wanted to be an English major. I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I liked everything. Like you're at Berkeley. You're probably good at everything. Your test scores are off the charts. You can probably do whatever you want to do. You just have to want it. That's the problem. And so what do you love enough to pour yourself, all of you, into? And so I had to get the electrical engineering degree, or I would have had to pull out of school, but I tried to leverage it in this way. So, but then the Media Lab, the MIT Media Lab was starting up, and they had taken, somebody just walked in with a Polaroid shirt. It's amazing. They had taken Steve Benton out of Polaroid, where he worked with the founder of Polaroid. You guys probably don't remember Polaroid. It was the Apple computer of its day. It was a super cool company. But he came back to the Media Lab to do a master's degree in holography. And so I'm like, whoa, that's the cool place to be. I applied, they let me in. I had no idea I wanted to go to grad school, but if there was grad school in holography, I was in. But there was no PhD. So anyway, I started moving around, and I thought I'd get a PhD in physics, and that optical computing with deep learning neural nets was gonna be the thing in the late 80s. And oh my God, it was awful. So then I ended up putting my resume online. This is in 1990, and some guy wrote back and said, hey, do you want to be a computer science professor at the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology in Australia? And I'm like, yeah, sure, send me the ticket. And he did. So I got on the plane and went and did that. And I ended up in Cologne because I got thrown out of Australia. I've been completely exonerated. Really, I didn't do anything wrong. But my visa wasn't renewed. It was the misunderstanding. I can explain it if you want to, but But yeah, so this art school said, why don't you come be a fellow? Because they had started these multimedia art schools in Germany, and I ended up there, sort of taking this project I was working on with an artist from Sydney to make a lunar illuminated hologram that filled a beach cove. And then when I was there, I realized, whoa, forget like the sun or lunar, like why not just do the whole thing, like a real moonshot, project video on the moon. And so I started to work on that when I went to do my PhD.
Wow.
But diverted.
That's amazing. So,
But I like the art stuff. It keeps me going, you know.
do you think you would have studied art if your parents had not?
Oh, I got another degree in art at Brown because I just took the courses to kind of, I joined a punk rock band. I took, like, just to keep, it really felt to me like I was being squeezed into this, you know, round peg, round hole. And I actually wanted facets, and I don't know, I was rebellious. I grew as a street fighting kid. I don't know. I just like I didn't want to compress myself in that way. It was very isolating, very lonely. I think, like probably all of you, we've been given a lot of confidence that we're smart. You're in Cal, you're smart, right? You can probably do whatever you want, but like those first couple of years of college, I thought were really tough because my high school, like the mayor taught physics. Our physics class was basically a solar cooker for a hot dog. It was basically it was like ridiculous. So I didn't have the same background as my colleagues from better schools. So it took me a while to catch up. But like I had confidence, but I needed to be in love with something to pour myself into it. And I happened to never really take a math class until I got to college because I was really good doing it out of the books. I was doing calculus in 7th grade. I was really good at it. But I wasn't, the idea of somebody deriving an equation on the board and the students shouting out the SIGNs of plus or minus, like I didn't understand why that, I was used to digesting it at my rate, not at the rate. And so you have to learn these things. And like, you know, it took a couple years.
So it sounds like your education was helpful and gave you good skills, but you really needed some kind of outlet in order to actually apply it and to learn?
For me to get it, I mean, just inclined planes don't do it for me, or solving for trusses. It's just, you know, like I'd rather solve a real problem. And I'm totally fine to do the truss stuff or the, you know, I grew up on a farm. Like I never once saw, I don't know if you guys take statics and mechanics, and I had to as an electrical engineer. Never once saw a block go down an inclined plane that way. Never once. Like I was pulling tractors out of, you know, swamps all the time. Like it never worked how it was supposed to. And so I just thought it was all, it was really hard to get excited about it.
Yeah.
It was dry.
Well, I think
it's
that
better now.
Yeah, I think so. I think one thing many people in the room are often thinking about is the idea of like risk, right? As an entrepreneur, risk is maybe one of the biggest things that we're thinking about. And you've done, you know, almost everything career-wise. You've been a CTO, you've been a professor, you've started companies. So when you founded One Laptop Per Child, you actually were at the MIT Media Lab.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about what it was like to found One Laptop Per Child and how you were able to take that risk to leave MIT Media Lab and being a professor to start this company?
Well, the bigger risk was telling the CEO of Intel, which is I had been at the previous year, that the project they were spending, call it $100 million a year, was never going to work because Intel only has what's called rail-to-rail processes, and for this chip that we were making to be the best in the world, we needed graded levels of voltage, not just 0 or high. And so that killed the project, and then I thought I'd never do commercial work again, and I applied to be a professor at MIT and got a call, and the founder had to stay 2 days to meet with the founder of the Media Lab, Nicholas Negroponte, and this sort of 10-minute meeting for him to check off on me as a professor turned into a 3-hour meeting, and we started One Laptop Per Child. But I needed to start something, and I got the faculty gig. That's kind of like a safe lifetime gig. Sold my houseboat in Sausalito and moved there. But I didn't find it at all risky to do that startup. My first startup I did after having brain surgery, and I needed health care, and we got some like this is as I was finishing my PhD, $4 million from DARPA, so that seemed pretty low risk. And then I was the CTO, and I said, look, I'll join if I get to pick the health insurance, because I had a brain tumor in my 20s, so I'm fine. I finished my PhD afterwards and done all this stuff since. But there's a stigma. I just told you I had a brain tumor, or you start smart or not, and I have to take pills every 12 hours since 1995, or I die. So I care a lot about getting good health insurance. So that was a risk for me. One laptop per child. We had all this money to try it, and I also had this faculty gig. Although I did have to choose. At one point, the president of MIT sent me a letter, do this sort of project manager thing, that's what she thought it was, for a $100 laptop, or be a professor. And I sort of thought, couple dozen students, couple dozen papers, or the opportunity to transform educational opportunities for the children of the world. We literally throw away half the children that are born in the world in that they don't get anything any of us would consider to be an education. So it was a pretty easy choice. It was a nice way to get fired. She's like, okay, get it out your system and then come back. And I'm like, okay. So even then it was get it out of your system, then come back and do it. And they just, because it seemed, even though it's a not-for-profit, it seemed like a startup. And for ethical and conflict of interest reasons, both myself and the director of the Media Lab had to leave for a while. I just didn't come back because the not-for-profit made $1 billion of revenue, catalyzed $30 billion of revenue for our for-profit partners, became the fastest-growing consumer electronic category ever recorded, and transformed the lives collectively between us and the for-profit companies of 100 million children in the world. And at that point, I'm just like, well, there are not enough MIT professors sleeping on the factory floors of the world. I grew up on a farm. I don't care. It's fine. How do you make things that can actually directly transform people's opportunities in life? And we had just done it. So I moved to Asia.
Wow.
And left MIT, sadly. It was 2008. I mean, I woke up every day for 3 years saying, I gave up being an MIT professor to be in this economic collapse where R&D, it was just, luckily Google bought my company at the end of that. But yeah, it was really rough. So that was risky.
So there were some points where you actually did feel some regret, maybe oh, maybe I shouldn't have done this, and you weren't really sure while you were on the...
Well, I think at the end of the startup particularly, I'm always metaphorically curled up in the fetal position with a blankie and wanting a bottle of tequila. But then you got to shake it off, get up the next day, and figure out what you're going to do next. But you put all of yourself into these things, and it doesn't always go right. People remember the successes. It's a cliche, but the failures really suck. But yeah. So OLPC was really, I thought, not much risk to do it, although, my mom wanted to disown me. Finally, her daughter was this respectable MIT professor. She's like, why are you leaving? And I just felt I needed to do it. So I had to give up MIT to do it, which was hard because I really wanted to. I loved MIT. I wanted to be at MIT as well. But it's much more risky when you put all of your savings, you put your house up for mortgage, you take millions of dollars from your friends, as I did at the end of 2008, because I started this company called Pixel Chi, where we were I don't know if you remember Q3 2008, but the sky really fell. It really fell. And in Q4, on Sand Hill Road, there were free drinks in the fridge and the lights were on, but there was no money going out of that. And I just created this $1 billion thing. And it was commercializing a lot of that technology to get people really low power screens that were sunlight readable, retinal resolution, before Apple even had retinal resolution, that were in the lowest cost laptop ever made by far. They went into a $100 laptop that we shipped, that I designed and architected and shipped and delivered to high volume mass production. And so I got money, but I had to take millions of dollars from my friends. I wanted my friendship. It's interesting, somebody was talking in the intro about Thursday night dinner. Brewster Kahle was one of my investors, who's Internet Archive. And I was not going to lose their money. So at great personal cost, I didn't see my family free. I lived in Asia or on a plane, and it was really quite difficult. It was Sisyphean. It was the fabs that make the LCD screens were running at negative 40% margin. There were multi-billion-dollar fines for price fixing. The CEOs were going to jails in California for the price fixing scandal. By the way, I had nothing to do with it. I was a professor during that time. Totally. Like, you couldn't hire a sales guy. You had to go to the DOJ website to find out if they were under indictment for price fixing, and literally all of them were under indictment. And so you had, like, it was awful. But Sergey Brin really liked what I was doing, and hired the company. So I got to work for Sergey Brin at the end of it, who was, Sergey Brin is a co-founder of Google with Larry. So that was good.
That's good.
In the end, but it was 5 years. Hell.
Well, what do you think that your biggest learning was from that experience then? You know, what did you learn that maybe you applied in your next startup? It sounds like you
closed the company earlier. It was really, I didn't want to lose the money from my friends, but it just nearly destroyed me, I think. It was very painful in a way that my first two startups weren't. Because even though we were shipping product, like, we'd have these contracts, really good deals in sales and so forth, and then literally you'd go into a meeting and they're like, go ahead, sue us, we're broke anyway, I'm going to jail next week. I don't care. And so I found myself, like, riding my bike around, figuring out where that executive's kid played soccer. I wasn't really stalking. I'm just like, oh, well, Junior plays soccer here. By the way, that deal, can we do this instead? It had to be in a minute. Handshake, and, like, now I know all the executives. The good part about it is I know the executives all over Asia and how to renegotiate fast, because it's just a handshake at that point, because they're not going to sign anything, but you can get something out of it. And I had to figure that out to try to save the company, and that was hard. I know all the bike paths in Taipei now.
So closing earlier, and since we're here in Berkeley, we have a lot of students who want to do, like, social impact startups and ventures. Is there any other advice that you would give to them about starting a social impact venture?
Yeah, you probably have the idea. How do you get the money? And I would say, what I do is I think of this crazy fun idea of something I want to do, and I start telling everybody I'm going to do it. And you have to be willing to have them think you're stark raving mad. You just have to be willing. Like, everything I've ever done of any note, when I first voiced it, people thought I was stark raving. So if they think that, great, you're on the right track. They're even a little bit jealous. Take the feedback. What you have to hear is like, oh, that'll never work. They can say that, but what would be really helpful is if you can ask them why it won't work. And then they might have some good points, and write them down. Like, I remember in the $100 laptop days, I was over with a very, very, very large maker of consumer electronics. Like, very, 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 I know you're not supposed to say old, but huge. And the chairman wanted to see me, so I flew over and saw the chairman and walked into this room. He was flanked by 4 EVPs on one side, 4 EVPs on the other side, and they just started laughing at me. It was just me on the other side. At least I wore a suit. I can't tell the country, but formal. It would be obvious if I said the name of the country. And they just started laughing. And they're like, $100 laptop, ha, 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 it'll never work. And I realized I was actually the humor portion of their day. Oh, wow. And so the women in the audience will like this. I pulled out a notebook, and I'm like, okay, tell me why it won't work. And I dutifully took notes for the next hour and a half. And at the end of the hour and a half, there were like 21 things on the list. And 16 of these totally solved. But these new 5, these are really good. We hadn't thought you guys know a lot about laptops. Of course, you know a lot about laptops. You know a lot about manufacturing. You know a lot about the whole end-to-end thing. Here's what I'm going to do. Is I proposed to the chairman of this extremely large company with the 8 executive vice presidents in the room. I was going to take it back to the team. The team then was just me. They did not need to know that. And we were going to chew on them for a while, and could we come back and have some dialogue in the next 3 months, see how we got through it. And if it was very good for face. And then I realized, whoa, this is a great way to get people, and this is to answer the question, to debug your idea on paper. It's so much easier. Everybody says build something first, deploy. It's actually way easier to think about it on paper first with people that have expertise in different aspects of what you're trying to do, because they can debug it really fast and can save you a whole bunch of time. So I started arranging for meetings with every high-level executive I could get to call me back. And basically, I think in 3 months later, Kofi Annan, the then head of the United Nations, unveiled my hand-soldered prototype of the $100 laptop at the United Nations Summit on the Digital Divide. And at that point thereafter, almost every head of state on earth wanted the laptops en masse through the ministries of education in their countries to distribute to the children like textbooks. And so that was enough at that point to show sales and marketing for the manufacturers who had laughed in my face just 3 months earlier to say, whoa, we could move a lot of product this way. Yep, and that design is really solid. The CTOs that they trust said, yep, it'll work. So, you have to hear the negative feedback and just view it as, like a lawyer, like an engineer. Just write it down, like it's just problem solving, simultaneous problem solving of all these things. And so that's what I would do, is just tell everybody. And if it's really a fun, crazy project, if you tell people about it, kindred spirits will beat a path to your door because they want to work on it too, and they're going to be good at this other thing that you're not, and then you can do it together, and it's less lonely, and then somebody else can point out a thing, and that's how I kind of do everything. You just start with this crazy idea, but you have to be willing to let people laugh at you. It's okay. It's part of the process, I think.
That is so interesting. Yeah, I think that, not to stereotype engineers, but sometimes engineers might jump to building something right before they even see if people want it or see if there are customers for it. So since that initiative, this is how you've developed your ideas for all of your ventures. You've told people who you think might be interested, and if they're not laughing at you, then maybe your idea is not big enough.
Yeah, exactly. It has to be really big. What's really this latest thing that I'm doing, I really wasn't sure. I had left Facebook to pursue, we'll talk about later, this project I'm doing. And I wasn't sure if I should go back to the university, if it should be a not-for-profit, if it should stay and do it at Facebook. Mm-hmm. But it just really seemed like a swing for the fences, venture capital kind of thing. And that we could get to scale if successful. So I decided to create it as a startup for that reason. It matches well with what venture capital needs to do with its structure. Like they need 10x, 100x return. They make all their money out of, as Reid Hoffman writes, he's like, what are the 3 companies starting this year that will actually, of the thousands, the 3, that will actually matter in 7 years to his top line, bottom line? And there are only 3. So he needs to be in more than 3, but that's what venture capital works on. And so they're going to bet on you if you have an opportunity to do that. Now, if you're doing social good, here's the really interesting thing about venture capitalists. It's not just about money. They're totally happy to do social good too. Like they'd love for it to work, especially if it doesn't end up being one of those 3, and it's providing great, return for humanity. That's fantastic. If it can even just do 2x, 3x, 10x, that kind of thing, it's also awesome. Everybody focuses on the top ones, but you can work in that structure, in a VC structure. They might not fund you if they don't think you can be one of those 3. But if you fall short, as thousands do, you can still have an interesting business that delivers a lot of good for humanity. And they're really great with that, actually.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I think we want to move on a little bit to some of your experiences. You have had a lot of interesting experience. So for example, you were head of the display division at Google X, which is Alphabet's kind of moonshot factory for developing innovative ideas such as the self-driving car, for example. Okay. So can you tell us a bit about your experience at Google X and really how did innovation work there and how was it different than a startup?
Unlimited money.
That's helpful.
It's not. I actually think the data says otherwise. That unlimited money means a lack of discipline. And Bell Labs is the exception to the rule, not the rule. If you look at these places, Xerox PARC, interval research. You know, I don't want to ever diss my former employer, but if you look at the impact of the venture capital funding model versus these big corporate labs, it's undeniable, with the exception being Bell Labs historically. But at that time, there really wasn't much VC when that was really inventing the transistor and all this. Bell Labs was the Google of its day that just basically printed money from, it was a monopoly and actually got killed for being a monopoly. I don't know how much your background, but like, so they had an amazing R&D, legendary R&D effort with lots and lots of Nobel Prizes and incredible work that has had wide-ranging impact. But I would say I'm actually more comfortable in executing something that can change things. And for part of that, you do need this discipline rather than, and I think it's Google X on some level was about Google, now called the mother company. It's now part of, as you said, Alphabet, because it was in Google, but yeah, it's called Alphabet now. We don't have to go through that transition. I think it was about Google, Alphabet getting good at hardware, and so attracting extraordinary talent in hardware by letting them do these audacious moonshot projects to beef up the talent. But part of it was Google learning how to get good at hardware. They were good at data centers, but the hardware stuff that we're talking, consumer electronics, cars, stuff like that, has taken longer. And it's a large organization, and getting good at that, I think, is another value of it. But I found it way easier to have impact working through a VC structure.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me how sometimes startups can thrive when they actually put on more constraints on their project, right? Yeah. So is that kind of the discipline that you're referring to of they have so much money so they can kind of do anything, so there's nothing to constrain them to actually focus on different products? Physics
has to win, not just, it's not even that. It's like there really are equations, and you can really write them on the board. And even though everybody doesn't know what the 5-syllable words mean, there are, like, the notion of generalist and the fungible computer scientist is very, very powerful in software startups. But that's not going to, make the new car engine, there are a bunch of different things that you have to know about to drive what the correct direction is. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of detail in it. And yes, you have to be generalist, but you have to have this deep expertise in the stuff I was doing in optics and physics and electronics to lead you to the correct direction. And I think there was, by nature, I think in the big software ate the world, right? So the decisions are made by people who have made the most successful businesses, pick a time, certainly the last 150 years, whatever. And so they're right, but actually what they're really good at is something else. And so I just would rather, I need the math and science have to lead on the decision making for what's doable or isn't, because it can take you 3 years to make a prototype. You can't just, at Facebook, literally somebody changes 2 lines of code, ships it out to 1 million people. If it doesn't break anything, it's out to a couple billion people by the end of the week. Old school. Maybe it's different now. I'm not there now, I know that. But you can't do that with hardware, because there's this fundamental thing about hardware. It seems obvious when I say it. You can't change it after you ship it. Can't. And that means the way you structure the design and development is quite different. And so that, I think, is a hard thing for they're great. I had a great time there. It was great, It's really nice after all those tough Sisyphean days in Taipei. I was very, very grateful to Google, and thank you for, letting me pay off my mortgage on my house and all the, it's like, oh, great. But for me, it's better. I'm more entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
I'm more of a street fighter, and that's also everybody's so googly, and I don't know. I tried, but it's okay. It's okay if you're entrepreneurial. I like it when the big company buys my company, and then I'm there for a couple of years to hand it over, and then I go back to be entrepreneurial. It's more where I'm comfortable, and it just depends. Different people are good at different things, and it's fine. We need all different types of people.
So you mentioned Facebook, so maybe we should just jump to talking about them. So yeah, you worked at Facebook as well, and you were the executive director of Oculus at Facebook, of engineering.
Yeah.
So maybe how was the culture like at Oculus? And VR and AR has notoriously been kind of a small market since it's been around. What is the future of VR and AR?
Right. The biggest moneymaker in entertainment is first-person shooter games. As I mentioned, I grew up with guns, so now I was working with people that every night what they did for fun is go home and virtually shoot the crap out of each other. So it wasn't really the culture for me, I'm just going to say. So like I was not, fine, like when I was a teenager, but like I just, like I was interested in other things. So VR and AR, like what's happening with it? In some level, I've been working on it since the 80s in holography for things with surgery, air traffic control, be anywhere with anyone at any time is what it can enable. But there are 4 major problems that are preventing the mass adaptation of VR and AR. And one is the headset, or whether it's telepathic or a contact lens or an implant, or the one thing that's acceptable to wear on your face, and this really has to be this form factor, not a shoebox. That's one. 2 is the space, the mapping of the space. So when I touch this chair, my finger hits the chair, not an inch above, not an inch below. That's the mapping of the space. 3 is how you interact, like voice. Yes, voice has gotten so much better. Maybe that's the thing. Gesture, it's no longer keyboard and mouse. Or touchscreen. That doesn't make any sense in VR. So there's that, making that interaction as natural as our interaction is. So that's a lot of gestures and body language that needs to be subtly caught. And then 4th, what is the content that passes, Larry Page, CEO of Alphabet, has this rule when you pitch a product to him. Has to pass the toothbrush test, which means people have to use it once or hopefully twice a day. And so what is the content that's going to get people into VR and AR in a way that they love it and need it the way you use a toothbrush or more? That's at least 6 minutes a day of oral care if you're following dental guidelines, I think. Maybe it's more, flossing and the whole thing. Yes, I added in. Right. So what is that? And so those are 4 really hard problems, and there's a lot of effort on it. But it's gotten a lot better. But given the tens of billions of dollars of investment, people are calling it VR AR winter right now. Companies are. I saw another company. Its name escapes me. Went out of business this week, but nobody's really executed on the money. The big companies may keep heavy on, because if Apple's doing it, Google has to do it, and Facebook has to do it, and Microsoft has to do it, because they don't want somebody else to get it. So there's a lot of talent working on the long-term efforts, and so some things can come out. There's certainly great niche stuff. Yeah. Fantastic niche stuff for a lot of stuff in hospitals, treating burn victims, treating people. Psychiatric stuff. There's tons and tons of stuff like that that's really useful, although it takes a long time to get through FDA. But the big companies have the reserves to get through it. The question is, how do you solve all 4 of those problems? The thing that I observed at Facebook was that the 3D sensing stuff that's now in every iPhone and most other smartphones was going to does give, I saw it coming a few years ago, an opportunity for something I thought was much more interesting than VR and AR. And honestly, it's because I've been thinking about VR and AR for 30 years. And if you ever get like that, the young people, like it's all magical to them, switch fields. Don't be a party pooper. It's new for somebody else, and maybe they can find it, but maybe you need to go do something new. Because, yet another young 20-something would come into my office and tell me, gasping about what the future was. And like, yeah, that was a dream. I could tell you every, paper from the 70s, from the 80s, from the 90s, and here were the 5 problems then, and how are you going to solve these 5 problems? But like, let them go and do it. But I noticed that these camera chips were coming out with very, very high efficacy in the near-infrared light. I knew our bodies were translucent to near-infrared light. And what was cool about these camera chips is they had pixels the size of the wavelength of light. And I thought that could be incredibly disruptive to allow us to see inside of our bodies and brains and telepathically communicate and diagnose cancer and heart disease. My life was saved by an MRI. I nearly didn't have it because it was too expensive. I didn't know I needed it. But somebody sprung for the cost of it, and so I got to live. The brain tumor I mentioned before was found. And the cost of MRI hasn't changed in the 25 years since my brain tumor was diagnosed, and I nearly died. I dropped out of my PhD in physics to go home to die. I was living in a wheelchair, sleeping 20 hours a day, body full of sores, on and on and on. Anyway, so it's still expensive, and I thought, wow, the number of people working on VR and AR is not a problem. They don't really need me. Like I'm an expert, I got some expertise, but nobody sees this thing. So I went off and said, what can we do with this manufacturing process development that tens of billions of dollars were spent to make these manufacturing process improvements, to make these camera chips with very small pixels and high, it's called quantum efficiency, light to electrons. You want photons converted to electrons at a high rate. That's called quantum efficiency. And they cost $1 and they're in your iPhone. And what can we do to basically rethink medical imaging and also seeing thoughts using these chips? And we've now architected new chips, and we're well on our way. But I just sort of, it becomes like pretty crowded. And I think that's the problem. I think I'm entrepreneurial, so I like to go off in these new spaces. So.
Yeah, let's talk about open water. So you recognize that personally the fMRI can have a big impact and can save lives.
Yeah.
And then you also recognize this technology that maybe could be used for this.
Yeah.
So when did you recognize that this was something that you want to work on? And yeah.
Oh, I didn't know with infrared, but this is what I pitched for my professor job in MIT in 2005. And then I started and I could get the $100 laptop to work faster. It's what I pitched to Sergey that got him to acqui-hire my company, was pitching, let's do brain-computer communication non-invasively. And I presented this idea, and he acqui-hired my company. And I show up, I'm like, great, we're going to do this. And he's like, no, consumer electronics people are kind of boring, and I wanted to make sure you were creative, but I need you to do this other stuff. It was great. I was happy to do this other stuff. I can tell you about it too, but then Mark Zuckerberg really wanted to meet, and something happened at Google that I was kind of angry at, because I'm so loyal. And then I'm like, okay, I'll have dinner. And then Mark somehow figured out my comp pack and put a 0, a 10x on my compensation. I thought Google paid really well. They did. So it was like, whoa, they were kind of buying me as a person. And I started to tell Mark about brain-computer communication. And I swear his feet didn't touch the ground for the rest of the dinner. And then I'm like, okay, I'm going. And he made me text Sergey right there. So I did, I'm like, okay, I'm doing it. So, but then I started, and he's like, look, we really are spending a lot of money on VR and AR. Nobody's really shipped anything. We need, somebody that knows how to ship consumer electronics that's distinguished by the optics and the displays. So that's what Facebook needed me to do. And so, you start with these ideas, but then the reality of economics. And I was being extremely well paid. I'm very happy to help, but there's so many people coming into it. I thought I should go over here, and I could do more good over here. And it may fail. So I spent a year working alone because I didn't know if it had legs. And then I got it. And then now the company, a year by myself, 2 years with people. And we're now, you can look at our website, we have images that rival MRI. And I showed live on stage at TED, focusing through skull and brain to the diameter of a neuron, where we could read and potentially write neuron states as well with this, non-invasively, no surgery. I've had brain surgery, hardest thing I did in my life, I know. I go to these brain-computer interface conferences, and everybody's cracking up in the skull and drilling in. I'm like, I don't think it's a big market. When it actually comes to it, you're going to do it if you're going to die. But otherwise, you're going to wait for a later generation, I'm pretty sure. So non-invasive. Plus, there's the privacy issue of never being able to take it out of your brain. And again, I've been at Facebook. They had some privacy issues. Makes those seem small if you think about your innermost thoughts and that last bastion of privacy. So I think there's, so working on that, and really what that also enables us, we use focused ultrasonic pings as well, and it turns out if we focus these ultrasonic pings for longer, we can do surgery without the knife, we can cure diabetes, we can fix broken bones instantly, we can go through the blood-brain barrier, we can deliver chemotherapy doses at the correct dose, but with 100x lower amount of chemo bathing through your system, because we can ultrasonically burst them. So what we're talking about is actually ultimately a hospital in the box. It's sort of like if you think of SpaceX as an innovator, they're going to Mars, not dying on impact, but they're making their money launching satellites. So we're starting with medical imaging, but our Mars is the whole thing, like brain-computer interface, surgery without the knife, all of that. But starting with the thing I think 3/4 of humanity lacks access to, which is how we diagnose diseases. We diagnose them later. It's more expensive, more pain and suffering, less good outcomes. So getting earlier, lower cost medical imaging without radiation is what we're starting on first for products.
So what are some, what are some like challenges that you have then moving forward? Because this, sounds like an awesome startup, and I know that you're growing. What are some challenges that you're working on right now?
Well, the biggest challenge that emerged this summer was the laser the specs on we use basically three major new components. We've developed a laser, a new kind of camera chip, and a new kind of ultrasonic chip. The ultrasonic and camera chips can be made in the silicon fabs of Asia. The laser ultimately can be, but it was getting pretty expensive and pretty big. So we beefed up the laser team. We've got this extraordinary laser team. We even have a Nobel Prize winner in laser physics as an advisor. We've got a bunch of, and we've worked on lowering the cost and several different laser approaches, because one of the things about the laser is it has to have, it's a pulse laser, so it pulses almost like a flash in a flash camera when you're at night, and so it also has to have a very, very, very fine color, or what's called line width. And so we've spent a lot of effort on that and made some huge progress from a systems perspective in reducing the difficult specs for the laser in ingenious ways. And these patents aren't mine. They're my incredible people that have come together to make open water that I get to work with every day, who are just, it's just astonishing to walk in and hear the ideas. I was working in the lab this afternoon and got to hear about even a new invention that, there's a guy that started last week, and it's just so interesting to see how we come together in this multidisciplinary team to sort of solve the problem. But basically, we're cost downing and shrinking it right now. Cost down, sorry, that's my Chinese English, but lowering the cost profile even of the prototype. So we'll have alpha kits this year. We're scanning live rats this back half of the year, and we're working on the cost down and laser. Those are the three challenges in front of us, and then we're looking at development partners who know more about, it's like the balkanization of the healthcare industry. Everybody goes to the same medical imaging suite in the hospital, but all the departments are based on body part, like knee or breast or heart or head or nose or ear, literally, there's a whole set of different doctors for each body part. It's amazing. So, knowing the ins and outs of end-to-end specs and, how the nurses are using it, how the reimbursement happens, how blah, 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 blah. So we're working with and attracting companies who we're working on development with them. So that's
Amazing.
What we're doing with them now.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we have some students that will want to ask some questions.
Yeah, I think Mary Lou will answer almost any question. So I would love to actually see if there are any questions in the back. We usually start in the front, so I'll let you all think a little bit. Yeah, fantastic. come on over there. I only have one microphone, but if you would just state your name and what you're focused on in terms of academics or not.
Hi, my name is Linus Lee. I'm studying CS as an undergrad. You mentioned Bell Labs at some point in the middle of the session, and you've also worked at like Google X and these other sort of researchy, but also focused on like investing a lot of capital and a lot of resources into bringing new technologies forward. What do you think is the thing that set Bell Labs apart in its ability to like create basically all the infrastructure that underlies technology today versus the amazing but not quite incredible things that X and these other laboratories are doing?
I think because VC didn't exist. Like Bell, I don't I don't want to diss Bell Labs, but there was no other. I guess there was IBM research, but it was they were pouring money into the best brains they could get. They had this structure. I think has been replicated, but I think it had to do with the time. And that nobody else was pouring money. But there are people that in this room that I'm looking at that know way more about Bell Labs. The guy with the blue thing over there, for example. But that's my, in summary, I think it was the time of it. Where Xerox PARC tried to do it, but you know, Steve Jobs got to visit and stole them out. Like, it's very, there's this famous book, Xerox PARC, Fumbling the Future, how they invented all this stuff for personal computing revolution and refused to ship it because, you know, there's also this tendency of that. So I can talk to you more about it later and recommend a few books, but not my area of expertise. All right. Sorry, maybe it's yours.
No.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Noé. I'm from Paris. I'm doing grad studies in entrepreneurship at Berkeley. And I was just wondering if, like, what's your take, maybe like to have, would you see the future of medical imagery being in holography? Since you've been working in holography, would you like see some pretty good advantages to having holographic medical images and using them?
Sure. What we're doing, it's interesting in Bell Labs. Dennis Gabor invented holography at Bell Labs, but it was an information theory thing, not just capturing the intensity of light, but the phase of light, because you can view light as a wave and it interferes, and by capturing the interference, you have more information. And that's what we're using with near-infrared light, where there's 100 years of predicate products using near-infrared light to see inside of the body, approved by the FDA with really, really lousy resolution. People use something called ballistic light, which is the light that doesn't get scattered. But here's the problem. X-rays go through your body, gamma rays, 2-ton magnetic fields, and near-infrared light. And red light. Actually, if you take your camera out, turn on the flashlight, and put it over your finger, you're going to see red light going straight through. You can just do it right now. Guess which one is far cheaper? The red light. The problem is no one could figure out how to de-scatter the light. And when I saw what was coming down the pike for 3D sensing for VR and AR, with micron-sized pixels, that's the size of the wavelength of light, and it's just like, oh shit. Sorry. Oh my God. Like, you could record a hologram and then mathematically de-scatter the light with Fourier transforms. So sorry, just mathematically decode that image of the interference structures from an information theory. Yes, of course we can do it in 3D. We can throw it in VR and AR. Yeah. I've been doing 3D for like 30 years. Yeah. But the hard part is that an MRI still costs more than $1,000, and you know the cost structure would take this full stage. It's the most expensive room in the hospital. If you take a CT scan, you can only have 10 of them, or your chance of cancer goes up to 6% from the CT scan itself. And you know, like, we could actually treat diseases much more differently. For example, the most expensive disease for every country of the world is brain disease. And we use a subjective measure of brain disease. Like, you basically answer these questions. It's called DSM. Depression's a huge one. Typical depressed person loses 12 years of employment for depression. And they answer these questions, subjective questions. Are you eating a lot? Have you gained weight? Are you sleeping a lot? Do you have thoughts of suicide? If you answer yes to that and a litany of questions, that's the definition of clinical depression. And you're out of it when you stop answering yes. And instead, if we can MRI them, we can look at a pattern, what type of depression, how the therapy is working, and how it's getting better and worse. But you can't do that right now because it's too expensive. For example, breast imaging. We use mammography. Half of women have dense breast tissue, and you can't diagnose until stage 3, typically. So that means the woman takes a year off from work, goes through chemo fog. It's really expensive. Why don't we just do an MRI? We know we would save, the death rate would go down in half. We don't do it because it's too expensive. It's the single reason. It's how we diagnose all kinds of cancer and diseases, by seeing inside of our bodies. So it just seems, I don't know. Yeah, we can put it in 3D. The radiologists love to see all the noise. The surgeons love the 3D. It's okay. They can all have the version, it's software. We can give them whatever they want. They should be happy. And, the machine learning is better than the radiologists at decoding it. But we like radiologists. We want everybody, let's get the tools to everybody. But yeah, it's really interesting to see if we can get these tools out to all the people that can use them faster. That's what keeps me up.
Hi, Ms. Jepsen. My name is Ishal. I'm a first year studying computer science. And one of the questions I had for you is when you're doing social good projects when you're doing social good projects or startups, there's a lot of emphasis on impact. So I was wondering, how do you measure your impact? And then also kind of related to that, I think you mentioned that at Open Waters, your grand idea is to be able to your final solution is not what you're currently implementing. Right now you have your imaging business, which is mainly funding the company. So I was wondering, are you guys are you guys mainly funded by that business or by a VC funding or yeah?
Are we getting what by what? It's just eat the mic.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, that's better. Yeah, so basically my question was, how do you measure your impact in your social good startups and projects? And then also, for example, in Open Waters, you were mentioning how you have an imaging business that's mainly funding the company. So I was wondering, are you mainly funded by that or by VC funding?
Oh, right. We don't have a product yet, so we're pre-revenue, meaning we're just spending money that VC invests in us. But the fastest way we can start, the way I measure impact is in this case diagnosing conditions of people. In the case of OLPC, was getting the laptops with the internet to the kids. We won a lot of awards. The biggest reward by far was getting the laptops to kids. I remember the first kid that wrote to me, his name was Badmus. He was in Nigeria. He got a prototype laptop, and he wrote to me and he said, "I love my laptop more than my life." And I wrote back to that note because I'm like, that's kind of screwed up, right? And then I wrote to Badmus, and he was a poor kid, and he didn't have the school fees or the uniform, but he swept up and he wasn't allowed to be a full student, but they gave him a laptop anyway. And actually, in Badmus's situation, totally healthy response, I thought. So I became a pen pal with Badmus, who's now in college actually. And so here's the thing: is the impact is on the lives changed or transformed in a positive way. Now, yeah, VC wants to get their money back, and if there was any innovation in medical imaging, this would actually be hard. But it hasn't changed in 25 years. Could you imagine in consumer electronics the price and size of something the same as 1995? That would be nuts. So that's how we measure impact. There's lots of studies to measure impact, but for me, that's the thing that really means the most to me is the human change. And by the way, it's really, I should say, the life cycle, and particularly as we enable brain-computer communication. I just want to point out, we're not the only living things with brains on the planet. And we might start collaborating with them and stop eating them. It's possible. Maybe one will get into Berkeley. How long will that take? I mean, seriously, it's in reach. Could we make that faster? Think of diversity then.
That's amazing.
Berkeley could lead on this.
Go Bears, right?
First of all, thank you for sharing your story. My name is Yura, studying economics at Berkeley. What makes you keep motivated after undergoing so many difficulties and success?
Well, I think that as I mentioned, quite honestly, I have to take a dozen medications a day or I die. And I don't always think about this, but sometimes it's really hard to get them. And sometimes I put them all in the same bottle because it's easy to carry around. I look down like, if I don't take these, I die. So what do you want? We're alive now. What do you want to do when you're alive? And so I actually have to face that more often than most people. But in fact, any of us could walk out, I hope this doesn't happen, and get run over by a bus, like right tonight. Like it could happen. We somehow forget that. And the big secret, which shouldn't be such a secret, is every single one of us is going to die. We just don't know when. So what do you want to do now? Because now's the moment. So that's what I try to focus on. But yeah, there are tough days, and really tough days. And sometimes I have a couple glasses of wine and watch trash TV and like try to chill and try to figure out and sleep on it, and then I can maybe solve the problem. But especially the people stuff can be hard, and people are kind of dissing you in ways that you don't perceive to be fair. There's really fair. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of pain, but you try to focus on what you can get done and get the people that can support you, and who can run with you to try to if you're doing a big enough goal, you can bring people around you that are way more fun to hang out with than all the naysayers that you have to walk through, or all the people that keep resources from you or bully or all this stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of it.
I'm curious, what's trash TV for Mary Lou Jepsen?
What is the last thing that we saw? What is that thing? We just watched. It was good. It was The Spy. It was about Agent 88. It was an Israeli who infiltrated the Syrian government and became the assistant deputy of defense minister. It's crazy. It was interesting. I didn't know that it happened. It was a true story, kind of. It was awesome. It's on Netflix. It's a little series. Binge watch it.
Hi, hello. My name is Fabiola. I'm studying a one-year program on entrepreneurship, and I wanted to ask, what would be the advice, or what was the hardest thing, for changing paths? For example, you being a professor and then changing to entrepreneurship.
Oh, right. So I did my first startup. I only got my PhD because I was holography is, there are no jobs for ads for holography. Basically, I'd have to convince some boss to fund something, and then when the money got tight, guess what got cut first? Holography. And I just thought I would die if I couldn't make holograms. And I think that's also in entrepreneurship. I feel like I would die if part of me would die. And so I guess I only got my PhD because at that time, I'm older than I think a lot of you, I just thought it was a union card for being a woman in technology. The amount of crap you had to put up with a PhD was less than without a PhD, and I just thought it was a faster path. And so really, it's oh yeah, I got that PhD, handy, I can be a professor because I have the union card. And I was just using it as a way to do interesting work rather than caring what the format was. How do I fund interesting work? And at the time, the computer graphics stuff I was doing in Australia, for example, or the Media Lab, I had done my graduate degree at the MIT Media Lab. It just seemed like a really great platform to do interesting work. And so that's why I did it. But obviously the students are the coolest part about being a professor. And I had no idea what, I thought being a professor was like going to be like being in grad school. It's not. It's really like a lot of meetings, and the grad students get to do all the cool work. Well, I don't know. What do you think? Like, it's fun. It's great. But like the best part about being a professor is getting to hang out with the students. So I think, and so that was awesome. But just like, what do? Like when you create $1 billion not-for-profit, catalyzing like the fastest-growing consumer electronic category ever recorded. Kind of have to look at like, maybe I could help more here than here. There's a lot of professors. Maybe I should go over here. Maybe I could do more value or deliver more value is how I think of it. But I didn't really, I just really liked holography, and I tried to find this niche away from kind of what felt to me like bullying. We haven't talked about gender much, but there were even less women. And so I just found this space that was comfortable. Like in holography, it was like half artists, half scientists. And it was really interesting because good holograms have to have really good signal to noise ratio. It sounds technical, but it's not. High signal, noise is bad, signal is good. Guess who made nicer holograms with better signal and noise ratio? The scientists or the artists? The artists, because they were showing it and they wanted no noise in their holograms. So in the conferences, they were like 50-50 men and women in the 80s. And so it was like a really kind of healthy environment, and I really loved the people, and I loved the work, and it was just a really nice kind of nurturing place to be for a while and grow. And so I just really wanted to keep staying in that environment. Unfortunately, there are no jobs, and especially after my brain tumor, I had to sell out and go flat because I really needed the health insurance. So I started working on 2D displays, because I could get health insurance.
We're so glad you started and continued working and continue doing so many different things. I can't wait to see what Open Water is going to do for the world, frankly. And I thank you for coming. I know students will want to come up and talk to you later, which is why I'm cutting the questions a little bit short. I think they want to get a little bit closer. I want to thank everybody for their attention. And most of all, Keith and Mary Lou, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Lou.